Why Vietnam is still poor. There are no simple, straightforward answers as to why some countries are poor. There are many factors that come into play as to their poor state, and some are controversial, but nonetheless factual. When looking at different nations of the world, economists use gross domestic product (GDP) per capita as an indicator of a country's economic well-being. GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services that a particular economy produces in a year. To become a high-income country by 2045, Vietnam needs to sustain average growth rates of at least 7% in the years ahead. While the country has the means to do this, without reform, it will just slow down and remain poor. Vietnam, many living below the poverty line. When you divide a country's GDP by its population, you get an idea of how much income, on average, the economy produces for each person each year. GDP is a measure of a nation's standard of living. It's interesting to note, however, that some developing countries have a higher GDP than developed countries. A country is thought to be poor if its people don't have a certain living standard. There are many people in Vietnam who don't have a good living standard. Just how poor is this Southeast Asian country on the South China Sea? Should the country be poor, seeing that it has a long coastline with top-notch harbours, as well as a vibrant tourism industry? Poverty. Half of Vietnam's population among ethnic minorities still live below the poverty line. People from these ethnic minority backgrounds are isolated, not only geographically, but socially too. The government has at least tried to address this problem, and they instituted their CEMA committee, Committee for Ethnic Minority and Mountainous Area Affairs. They want to work to improve education as well as social opportunities for this particular population. Vietnam is a very populous country with close to 100 million people, but a good percentage of the people live in poverty. Factors that have contributed to poverty include large families, even when parents are unemployed. This is one of the controversial topics that people don't like to address, but which is a stark reality. Then there is also a lack of education and lack of skills. Based on the drop in the country's poverty rate between the years 2010 and 2014, conditions in the nation definitely improved. However, issues such as poor education system, a poor and deteriorating infrastructure, as well as ethnic discrimination, is still threatening its growth in 2019. Mismanagement of funds. The United States has been strategizing with Vietnam, the idea being to transform the country into a more sustainable developing one. To this end, a 5-year plan was developed in 2014. Millions of dollars have been allocated to improve not only trade, but to also develop higher education. In fact, the country has set Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, achievable by 2030. These are goals to improve the healthcare system, tackle issues of equality, and improve the country's poverty rate. These seem like good plans to pull Vietnam out of poverty, so why is Vietnam still poor? Where is all the financial help and transformation efforts going? It's not as though there wasn't an improvement, but in spite of some true successes for Vietnam, poverty remains an issue. Resisting Western influence. There are political experts who believe that Vietnam is still poor because they resisted Western influence in the 19th century. It's still having negative repercussions. Their resistance to this influence caused the country to fall behind advanced countries, becoming prey for imperialist powers. No infrastructure, no private sector growth. Failing infrastructure, though, still remains one of the reasons that the country remains poor. Efforts have been made to bring electricity to everyone, but their infrastructure systems for water, sanitation, energy and telecommunication is still not good, and the private sector can't grow. The government's approach to infrastructure development hasn't been driven, and some small developments have scarcely made a difference. What the government needs to do is to accelerate productive investment, to boost the productivity of the country's huge labour force with investment in infrastructure, machinery and technology. Of course, it will require a more efficient financial system. The country's socio-economic development strategy for 2016-2020 acknowledges these problems as reasons why the country can't rise out of its poverty. It does, however, seem to realize the need to change things and accelerate progress. Corruption in high places. Many people say that the country's infrastructure is lacking because of corruption within Vietnam's leadership. They reckon that Vietnam's government is corrupt. When you look at the Corruption Perceptions Index world, Vietnam doesn't rank well. All the money supposed to be going towards healthcare, education and infrastructure is going straight into the pockets of many government officials. They make business deals that benefit them but cause damage to the state budget and also damage to the economy. The sad reality is that Vietnam's actual quality of life isn't poor because its people are uneducated or lazy. No, most Vietnamese are hard-working, aspirational people who want a decent life for themselves and their families. But they have to contend with their corrupt government. They should be demanding accountability from these people. Natural hazards. Unfortunately, if it's not the government, the country also has its fair share of natural hazards such as flooding. The country has a super long coastline, 3,200 kilometers long, and most of its population lives in coastal areas and low-lying deltas. The country is also heavily exposed to climate change, and this is expected to increase sea levels and coastal flooding. Flooding causes major problems in Vietnam, and this natural disaster increases poverty. Poor people often take longer to recover from a flood because of no insurance and limited or no borrowing capacity. Government is supposed to offer support after a flood, but this is often inadequate to support losses. A turbulent past. Decades of war between 1945 and 1975 have taken their toll on the country for sure, and until 1989, much of the government's resources went into the occupation of Cambodia and a border war with China. Vietnam was both politically and economically isolated from countries such as China and the USA, keeping a trade embargo in place. A process of reform began, but trade with America and neighbouring countries only started really in 1994. By then, Vietnam's economy was in a mess. Vietnam has enjoyed growth in the reform era from 1994 till now, and it is perhaps not ranked as one of the world's poorest countries anymore, but mismanagement and corruption in high places may well ensure that this country doesn't move up to where it belongs.